Only a couple of days since we've been able to celebrate anything, but we can today here on this Kroger Commitment Special as the four-star running back Nate Frazier from way out in California has just announced that he will be attending the University of Georgia, really continuing what's been a phenomenal haul for our running backs thus far in this 2024 class. You want the official particulars here. Frazier, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, ranks number 51 overall player, number 4 running back. That's now 3 top 10 rated running backs that Georgia has for this 2024 class, according to that 24/7 composite. I've got Jeff Sintel and Connor Riley on hand here to talk about what just goes down. Jeff, Frazier, a guy you've covered now for quite some time. So give us your insight here on Georgia winning the battle and bringing in a player that I believe that Georgia fans have really grown to like over the course of the last few months.
Yeah, guys, I think Nate Frazier is enough to get your hangover over, I guess, from last night with KJ Bolden. Here's some fast facts. Highest rated, should he go on to sign with the Dogs, and we certainly projected this to be the case. Highest rated Georgia running back signee since Zamir White in 2018. That's on the 24/7 Sports Composite. He's got your 10.58 speed. He's 5'11". He's about 210 pounds. He's your home run hitter. Really, for Georgia, what I've written in the story that posted immediately on DawgNation.com is this really slants the 2024 class towards the offensive side of the ball. Now, there's 4 of the highest rated, 7 highest rated commitments in the class, offensive side of the ball. Georgia now has 18 top 150 overall recruits in this class. The next closest school is Ohio State with 9. Gentlemen, that's a staggering number. And here's one that gets it to the really rarefied air for Georgia football fans. This is now the 12th commitment among the nation's top 100 overall prospects. The only time Georgia has been better than that among the nation's top 100 in scooping up those elite prospects was the 2018 cycle with Justin Fields, Zamir White, Jamari Sawyer. And we're still in the month of August in terms. Georgia's going to add a couple more to that, which I project to be the best all-time class in Georgia history.
Yeah, big stats there from Jeff Sintel. And kind of to keep that going here, he joins Dwight Phillips, number 93 overall player, number 8 running back, who, by the way, had really sensational highlight play on the long kick return for a touchdown to begin his scrimmage on Friday night. And then Chauncey Bowens, the flip from Florida, who also ranks in that top 10, number 121 overall. So, Connor, however you want to slice this up in terms of what Frazier adds to the overall depth of the class, or I think an emphatic answer to what has been a big question, a position of need at the running back spot here. I think Dell McGee's got reason to celebrate today.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say, is Dell McGee back in terms of what he's been able to do on the recruiting trail in this class? I think there's no bones about it. I think when you look at this Georgia team this season, running back is one of the bigger question marks there, and it's maybe not so much talent, but just the ability of those players to stay healthy. We know after this season that Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards are both likely off to the NFL after their fourth season at the University of Georgia. And so it helps to go out and add not just 2 top 10 rated running backs in this class, but 3. I think Phillips is going to be a guy that they're going to be able to use around formations, not just use him as a running back, but sort of use him in a variety of ways, get him out downfield and put him in space the way he's able to use his world-class speed to do so. And Frazier is sort of a running back that Georgia hasn't landed in a while. For the last couple of recruiting classes, your Branson Robinsons, your Roderick Robinsons, those guys are more the physical, sort of grinded out running backs. They're not necessarily big home run hitters, guys that are capable of breaking off 50, 60-yard runs. And so for Georgia to go out west to California, land Nate Frazier, and really bring in a guy that I think could be a difference maker year one for Georgia with what he's able to do from an offensive standpoint. I think that's huge for the future of this running back room. As Jeff pointed out, it's huge for the future of this Georgia offense. This needed to be a class that focused heavily on offense, and in landing a guy in Frazier who I believe On3 has rated as the number 1 running back in this class, plays for a powerhouse program in Mater Dei out there in California. Also has a pretty talented teammate, Naden Breland, defensive line recruit that is worth following there as well for Georgia. Another big win and a win for Dell McGee, one of the star recruiters early on in Kirby Smart's tenure, but some of the misses that he had in recent classes, specifically the Justice Haynes one a season ago, don't look quite as bad now as he's able to go in and beat out Alabama and Oregon to land one of the top running backs in this class, on top of already having 2 others already in the pocket.
I think you're bringing up something interesting, which I do think is important context in all of this, which is, Connor, you were there the other day when Kirby Smart talked about running backs during his introductory press conference to kind of begin Georgia's fall camp. And I sort of thought, I guess for lack of a better phrase, he sort of damned him with faint praise a little bit. I did not think he was effusive and glowing. And talking about that running back situation right now, even opening the door for a guy like Cash Jones to emerge this year, which on the one hand is potentially good news for Cash Jones. But on the other hand, I think kind of sets the bar pretty high for what he wants to see from the guys in that group here right now. So all the more reason, both because you're expecting some guys to leave the program, but I think that also, I mean, this is a Georgia team that last couple of years has been kind of near middle of the pack in the SEC in total rushing yards. All the more reason, I believe, Connor, for Georgia to kind of go out there and make sure it's populating this particular position group with the kind of explosive players that can just simply kind of put up bigger numbers than what we've seen from that spot from Georgia the last couple of seasons.
Right. If you're going to sit here and try and say that this is the same Georgia offense, even with Mike Bobo and what we don't know yet with what this is really going to look like, from what we saw at the end of Todd Monken's time here at Georgia, it was a very different offense than what Kirby Smart was running in the 2017-2018 seasons. They're not going to try and grind it out in a similar manner in which they have in years past. Now, that's not to say that, when the situation calls, they won't be able to do it. I think you go back and look at that 2021 team, Georgia's ability to run the ball well, I think was a big reason that team won the national championship, especially when you look at the big games that they won at the end there. Against Clemson to open the season. That game was won when they were able to grind the clock away at the end with big runs from Zamir White and James Cook. And then in that national championship game, yes, Stetson Bennett made some big plays with his arm in the fourth quarter. But for the first 3 quarters of that game, Georgia was really only doing anything when it started to open things up on the ground. The big run by James Cook, and then another strong fourth quarter there from Zamir White. So those two guys have been out of the program for a few years now. I'm really interested in, as you point out, in what we see from the running back position this year. I'll take it a step farther than you did. For Kirby Smart to come out and praise Cash Jones as the most effusively praised running back in his opening press conference, that's a pretty big red flag to me. Now, Branson Robinson, yes, is dealing with an injury, and for Kendall Milton, the story has been, can he stay healthy? And I believe in Kendall Milton's talent. The question is just, can he make it through a full 15-game season, which is what we talk about here at the University of Georgia when it comes to playing that many games, because they're playing for national championships. And so landing a guy in Frazier on top of a guy in Phillips, who's one of the fastest prospects in this class, regardless of position, and landing a guy that was committed to Florida in Bowens, and as Jeff has pointed out, a top 10 running back, you certainly eliminate, I think, some of the questions that come up with the talent level in this room. I think the question now going forward is, how are these running backs going to be used moving forward? As Georgia does have a new offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, a guy that got plenty of great running back production when he was last the offensive coordinator at Georgia, whether it be Todd Gurley, Nick Chubb, Keith Marshall prior to his injuries there. So I'm really interested in seeing what this running back position looks like moving forward, both under Del McGee, but also offensive coordinator Mike Bobo.
Yeah. So Jeff, to kind of, bring that back into discussion here, if there's some debate about how Georgia might throw the ball to running backs this year, who's the guy coming out of the backfield that's going to catch the ball? You would certainly think in future years with the Nate Frazier here, the athleticism he possesses, Dwight Phillips, I mentioned a moment ago, all of a sudden the kinds of running backs that can really be big time weapons out of the passing game, you're led to believe that won't be a question mark at all moving forward because of the athleticism this group has, specifically here, the guy that just committed, Frazier, that we're talking about right now. That's the kind of guy who I could definitely see be a big-time weapon out of the passing game in the near future, which is clearly something that Kirby Smart has grown to love about these Georgia offenses the last couple of years.
I tell you what, BA, look at you going tropical today, my man. This is one of those get your social media memes out right here for BA. I want to see BA give us a little hand swizzle right here for this one. I think Nate Frazier is the only running back in the country that can commit to a top tier program like Georgia, and I think he's not the fastest back in the class by 0.3 of a second. Who in the world has these problems that Georgia does? Mind you, let's do the math. Dwight Phillips Jr. is already 10.26 in the 100 meters, and then the best time for Nate Frazier is around 10.58, 10.56, and somehow he is a pedestrian back compared to what Dwight Phillips has. Now, those are cool stats to throw around, but really what it means is matchup problems. How do you deal with a 3-down back like Frazier when you've got something exotic, maybe the wheel routes a la James Cook with Dwight Phillips in the same backfield? You've got the tight ends that Georgia will have. I'm going to stress this again. This was a class that Georgia had to get offensive. They had to tilt the scales after another gully washer of a class last year defensively. This year's class, led by the nation's #1 quarterback, had to get more robust, had to get stronger on the offensive side. And this is a player that does that. I mean, it's kind of yin-yang with football recruiting because Georgia misses on a guy like Justice Haynes, and then that allows them to come in and scoop up and clean up some of their top targets in 2024. And now there was a teammate on Mater Day. This young man is already used to split backfields and rotation at Mater Day in Santa Ana, California. The nation's #2 running back in the 2025 cycle, that's Jordan Davis. He's in the same backfield, and he was already really loving him some dogs, especially early in his college recruiting. I think he'd taken 4 trips to Georgia by the end of his sophomore season. And now that lessens the chance for Georgia to sign a guy like that because Georgia now has brought in 3 different varying role-filling, specific play design filling type of backs here for the Georgia class. And again, you keep touting all these numbers. I think one of the most staggering ones for me is when you get another commit, it's my role here to kind of put my arms around everything. And guys, this is what it really means. Georgia has 18 commitments among the nation's top 150 overall prospects. And the next biggest gathering of top 150 guys, which kind of falls in with BA's longtime staple of give me as many as we can because we know Georgia will thrive the more that they get. Georgia has 18, and then Ohio State's the next closest school with 9. And that is a striking difference in terms of big boy recruiting.
Yeah, but Ohio State would have a lot more than that if Javon Bullard didn't hit so hard. They would be more than happy to tell you that. Since we've been talking, the Cubs have somehow tied it up with the Braves. Somebody put in the comment section, let me know how that happened. Also, speaking of the comment section, Jeff, one of the questions we get a lot here is, or we've been getting a lot already, is Aiden Breland, the teammate there at Mater Dei High School. What do you think this does to kind of impact his recruitment? There you go, Aiden Breland. Look at wow. We're like a real show. We're putting graphics up on the screen and stuff like that. That's amazing. So Breland obviously celebrating here on the heels of Nate Frazier, his high school teammate coming into Georgia. We've already got a pair of Georgia teammates high school teammates, a part of this 2024 class for Georgia. So what do you think Frazier means for Breland, a defensive lineman of note that we think that Georgia probably is, kind of chasing after here? What do we think this means for him?
Yeah, good question there. I think obviously it doesn't hurt. I think Frazier at Georgia, and guys, I'll be honest, this has kind of been a known thing for a couple months now, but especially when he didn't take late visits to A&M and he didn't take late visits to Alabama in the last week of the dead period where it opened up the last week of July, kind of cemented that a little bit. But here's what I can say, and maybe I'm going to say a little too much here, but maybe that'll get BA to listen to our broadcast more than his beloved Braves while he's dual tasking right here. I'm going to tell you this. If Georgia is probably going to land 2 out of the 4 of Nwaneri, Aiden Breland, and also Williams Nwaneri. So I think in LJ McCray, got to throw him in there as well. I think the chances of Breland go up. Perhaps it's good news with Williams Nwaneri in about 7 days, and then perhaps it's good news from LJ McCray later on down in the cycle. I think it's probably slotting that has a lot to do with that. If, for instance, if Williams Nwaneri jumps in and LJ McCray jumps into the Georgia class, first of all, DawgNation should be all wearing their tropical Hawaiian shirts if that happens. But the second thing is that that will probably cause Aiden Breland to look elsewhere.
Connor, anything else on Nate Frazier here? Because I do want to kind of get from Jeff a little bit of behind the scenes on what went down last night with KJ Bolden. Anything about Nate Frazier that we have not mentioned that we need to?
No, I think Jeff has sort of touched on this. When you have, Dylan Raiola and Ryan Puglisi at the quarterback position now, you have wide receivers that I think Georgia feels really good about in Nitro Tuggle and Sokovie White. And then you have an offensive line class. Well, I don't know if there's, an elite Amarius Mims, Monroe Freeling type player in this class. You've got a lot of massive bodies and a lot of guys to work with that can be molded into players over the years. And let's be honest, from all we've been told, it's not a great offensive line class in general for this recruiting cycle. I think this offensive class that Jeff has mentioned has both top-end talent and the volume that you look for, just the depth, especially I think in a transfer portal age where you're probably going to see, even at a program like Georgia that tries to work against this and prevent against this kind of stuff, you have, the numbers there to make this okay and to know that you're going to be able to withstand some potential defections. Again, considering the fact that, Frazier comes from one of the best high school programs in the country. He's not going to be overwhelmed by the competition at the University of Georgia. I think it's telling that, obviously, and we'll get to KJ Bolden here in a minute, but you look at some of the guys Georgia is targeting, the fact that they come from these elite programs, I think says something on what they look for and what they want. And Frazier absolutely fits that to a T, from both the physical makeup, but also the mental makeup as well.
All right, Jeff, so let's transition here. You were last night with KJ Bolden as the money fell from the sky. What can you tell us about it? Give me the fallout here on the Bolden decision to commit to Florida State. And honestly, I am kind of curious the vibe in the room and just really any details you want to give here as Bolden chooses Florida State over Georgia last night. And, of course, we were live on video watching as it happened, but you were in the room. So give us a little bit more on that.
Yeah, first of all, it's star-studded. It was kind of like I think it's the combination of things. There was a video, social media, gyroscope camera where you could do the Brian Kelly with the awkward dances. There was KJ Bolden up in letters, name up in letters, kind of like that belonged in a Vegas nightclub. There was a DJ playing a really good mix of tunes, I must admit there. And a lot of people were dressed up. It was kind of sort of black tie. You had a full meal. You had an open bar, had a full bar. I don't know if it was open. Working man like myself does not drift over there unless it's Marlowe's happy hour.
Sure.
But you saw Dylan Raiola there. You saw Aaron Nolan there. You saw like lots of guys, Edric Houston, Buford High guys. I think fallout. I think, Brandon, the thing you want to expect here is I'm expecting it's going to be very hard for Georgia to keep Jaden Perlotti, the Buford High linebacker, top 45, top 50 overall prospect in the class now. He is expected. He's even told me that KJ's decision would ultimately he would probably follow KJ wherever he goes because those guys are so tight. And I'm sure you're already cooking up in your head a really cool joke about another Buford curse after the fact, coming with a Georgia decommitment after this. But there was just a lot of guys there. I want to tell you what really stuck to me with those kind of opening statements made. I think there's a true leadership role happening there with Dylan Raiola. He was visibly, I guess, disappointed is the way, Brandon. I'm going to tell you this. If you can show me a picture of a Georgia fan that was more disappointed, the word I'll use, to see KJ Bolden go somewhere else than Dylan Raiola, I'd love to see it. As much as people want to throw their shots on social media or discuss bags, which I do think there's some reality to the NIL era these days and the numbers that are being thrown around. Some of the numbers you hear, but you don't feel really responsible reporting. They're significant and they're staggering for a safety. But thinking about Raiola there, he really cares about Georgia. He really wanted to play with KJ Bolden. And it was one of those situations where I asked him, and he's like, man, I'll be honest, I'm proud for him. I'm a big KJ Bolden fan, but I really wanted to play with him in college. I really wanted to go after championships in college. And now he's just going to have to go bring in hopefully, according to those Buford supporters, they want to bring in a state championship now at Buford High School. And I got to go back, Brandon, to I think I feel comfortable sharing this now. But one of the things I ask every recruit, especially a recruit like KJ Bolden, where I can see him their freshman year and I'm like, okay, that guy's big time. That guy's going to go anywhere in the world. And I say, let's call this my time capsule question. And I say, I'm going to put this in my back pocket and it's not going to come out until your commitment day or until you reveal it first. I say, you can go anywhere in the country. You can go play for any school in the country by the time you're a senior. Where are you going to go? And he looked at me. There was a little bit there was kind of like a nanosecond of hesitation, but then he said, I want to be a Nole. FSU's always been the school. And I think as much as things have changed for him since the fall of 2020 to now in August of 2023, you can say NIL all you want. You can say motherly influence, fatherly influence. You can say Buford curse or whatever. But this was a young man that somehow, whatever occurred, found a way to stick to his dream and go play for that dream school. I think one of the reasons I wanted to hit it hard in A-gap with all those stats is, folks, the University of Georgia is going to be just fine. I think a lot of astute fans, they bring up the point, hey, Georgia lost Jaden Hazelwood. They replaced him with George Pickens. Georgia didn't get Brian Brzee. Georgia didn't get Miles Murphy. Oh, the guy Jalen Carter they got was really stinking good. Georgia didn't get Owen Papo. Georgia ends up with Nakobe Dean. I'm of the belief now, Brandon, because I've seen it so many times, I think it's putting on that Georgia uniform and developing under those coaches which makes these players, these highly talented players, so successful, and in some ways ensure that they become future first rounders. And I think KJ Bolden's following his heart. People can determine whether they feel better in terms of Georgia was outbid, and that might rightfully be the case. But I think it's the program sticking to its guns on these bidding wars and deciding, you know what, the way others might want to try to build their team to catch up to Georgia, it's not the way Georgia's going to go about it.
Well, Connor, to me, obviously, I don't know that any Georgia fan that views Bolden, no disrespect, is like this player that you can't afford not to have. I just don't think a Georgia fan feels that way. At least I don't assume they feel that way, shouldn't feel that way. But as I told you, and I told our DawgNation Daily audience on Friday, that there is a certain aspect of the Bolden situation that would be a little bit of a bellwether here of how much does it continue the long-standing issue with Gwinnett County. A lot of Georgia fans today want to put the entire county in the transfer portal and trade it. I don't know if you'll go out and get like Cuyahoga County or, Mecklenburg County from some other state, but, bring that here and let's try our shot with that as opposed to another county, which is sort of, let you down over and over and over again. So it's a furtherance of all of that. And it's a reminder here of, a lot of the old adages in recruiting of, listen, follow the visits and whatever else. Like a lot of that touchy-feely stuff can disappear very, very quick in the presence of what we believe was a large sum of cash. And I'm not naive. I certainly believe, that Georgia was kind of, involved. They wouldn't have even been a hat on the table if they weren't willing to be kind of involved on this to a certain extent. But I think this is a little bit of an indication of what the modern state of these recruiting battles kind of looks like, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I think the fact that Auburn became such a factor so late in this, I think speaks to the larger point there. And look, KJ Bolden's not going to be the last guy we see this from. And as far as from the Gwinnett standpoint, like some of the numbers there are pretty staggering. The last player to sign with Georgia that played at Buford High School.
Ooh, I know this one. I didn't know you know this one. Connor, good for you, man.
Jeff, what is your answer? Do we have the same answer? Because there's a little bit of weirdness out there. Like you could say Isaac Nada, even though he played his senior year at IMG Academy, and he was actually, when he was at Buford, committed to Florida State, ironically enough. The answer that I have is Colton Houston back in the 2010 recruiting cycle.
Ooh, no, Connor, you went too far back. And I was thinking you might say Raiola would be a technicality, but he commits but doesn't sign at Buford. The name I have, and he didn't last at Georgia long. Brandon, you might remember this name, a 3-star offensive guard, Josh Cardello.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Way back when. That was 2013. 2013 when Georgia last I'm going to tell you, here's something, Brandon. There's a player right now that's a big-time player at Georgia, a big-time player in the state of Georgia, a big-time player at Buford High School. By the time he comes around, he's going to break the Buford curse. Whatever's left of it, you're going to like him, and he's going to have 5 stars by his name. So that's one of those time capsules, Brandon, but they're going to be just fine. The Buford curse eventually will go down like that town in Unforgiven. You remember when Clint Eastwood went about his business? That Buford curse is going to die sooner or later.
Well, we'll certainly follow that and see if it does. I honestly forgot where we kind of left off here. Connor, did you get a chance to finish the point that you were making about?
Yeah, and for the most part, yeah. I think it's interesting about Gwinnett. Gwinnett County, it's up there with one of the best talent producers in the country. Broward County, Dallas-Fort Worth area. In terms of per capita, they produce a ton of talent and a ton of elite talent. I think there have now been 18 5-stars that county has produced since Georgia last signed one from there. That would be Lorenzo Carter in the 2014 cycle. So it's not, in my opinion, just a Buford issue. Obviously, Buford is sort of the biggest program. Maybe them and Grayson there are the two big ones. But it's at least interesting to me. And yes, Georgia is able to recruit nationally. And I think you have to be able to recruit nationally because you're not always going to be even in a state as talented as Georgia, on the local prospects there in the backyard. And let's point out here as well, Georgia's not losing all of its local in-state battles. Daniel Calhoun was a local battle in the metro Atlanta area. Cobb and Gwinnett, in my opinion, there's not a huge difference there. You have to be able to recruit both counties very well, and Georgia did that in this recruiting cycle. And so I think it's interesting that there's definitely a trend now there. I don't think that you can deny this. And while, yes, Bolden might be more of a one-off because NIL was such a clear factor there, whereas maybe it hasn't with some of the other players, there are a lot of really good players that were high school prospects here that Georgia wanted badly, that Georgia made investments in from a time standpoint, much less a monetary one with NIL and whatnot. and they didn't end up getting them. And it's at the very least interesting to me that this has continued to happen, even with Georgia having success around the country and, quite frankly, having more success. And as someone who has dug into the numbers and knows them pretty well, when you remove the 2021 and thus the first part of the 2022 recruiting, they were sort of limited in what they could recruit because there were no visits. I think the big thing there is Georgia's made it clear that they're going to land more national guys moving forward than they are in-state Georgia products. And I do wonder maybe going forward what kind of impact that has on some of those Metro Atlanta schools that have those top players, where Georgia's not going to recruit every player that comes through Buford High School. They're really going to only go after the guys that sort of fit what they look for.
I mean, Jeff, you and I have been talking about this on DawgNation Daily for at least 7 years. I remember this being a pretty hot topic for us, like way back in like 2016, and it hasn't gotten any better since then. So this has kind of gone beyond just hey, it's kind of an odd triviality. Now, obviously, overall, it has not hurt Georgia. They've won the last 2 national championships. They have an elite class every year. This is more about the curiosity of, well, how come this remains true more so than how can Georgia ever build a great class if it can't recruit Gwinnett County? Clearly, it's not impacting Georgia's recruiting effort overall. But the fact that as Georgia has raised its profile all across the country with recruits, that it's still kind of fighting to get to 0 in Gwinnett County it's just an oddity, Jeff. And at this point in time, I do think it's a large enough question that requires a fairly substantial answer.
And it looks like we lost Jeff. I don't know. He might be having issues. Who knows with him?
At this point.
I think you and I
are on the same page about this.
Yeah.
It's like, when it's 1 or 2, when it's 3 or 4, it's everyone else. Who can, it's a funny thing, right? The idea, somebody a moment ago, we were talking about the Gwinnett curse. Somebody said, it's not a Gwinnett curse. I curse Gwinnett, which I think in some respects, some Georgia fans maybe feel that way. But at this point now, it's kind of gone beyond just the boy, isn't this weird, to the point of what exactly is going on here. I do believe it's a fair question to ask now, and to have more than the Atlanta area, there's a lot of people from all kinds of places. Like, there's a portion of that that's true, but sort of feels like we need more than just that now.
And to that point there, sure, KJ Bolden might not have spent every year of his life in Gwinnett County, but he spent every year that Georgia's been recruiting him in Gwinnett County playing for Buford. Caleb Downs a year ago, similar sort of thing. He'd spent his entire high school career in Gwinnett County. And so I'm not saying that because they're from Gwinnett County, Georgia needs to land them. But I do think that there's a case to be made that Georgia, for whatever reason, has struggled to recruit really well in that Gwinnett County area. And there are a number of reasons for that. We'll try and get some answers there. I intend on finding out what Kirby Smart thinks about this. I will say usually when we ask him about recruiting related questions during the course of the season, unlike a certain former Florida coach, he's pretty good about answering those honestly and providing insightful details on that. So I'll be interested in seeing what he ultimately has to say about that. There are also some other coaches on Georgia staff that could provide good intel into that in terms of what, recruiting the Gwinnett area looks like. But I think there's enough of a track record now. And as you point out, I think you and I are on the same page on this. It's no longer just a curiosity or just sort of, random message board posters looking to stir things up. I think there's something legitimately there when it comes to why has Georgia continued to struggle to recruit Gwinnett County. And this maybe isn't even a Kirby Smart issue, because I can remember, back in the 2013 cycle, Kirby Smart was, I believe, Alvin Kamara's lead recruiter when he was at Norcross. And that was a player Georgia really, really needed in that 2013 cycle, and they did not get him. And, maybe there's a world where if they get Alvin Kamara, you pair him with Nick Chubb, maybe things go a little bit differently at the end of the Mark Richt era there.
Well, now we'll get ready to wrap up here. But, I mean, look at a guy like Mike Matthews from Parkview. I mean, Georgia was never even really a hat on the table for Matthews, the best that I could tell. And Georgia fans didn't even bat an eyebrow at that. It's almost like they didn't even expect to be a factor in that recruitment because of how oftentimes that's been true. So clearly it's not Buford, or should say not just Buford. It's more than just that. And I'll also say this, to get deep in the weeds here for a moment. When Mickey Conn was the coach at Grayson, a guy who played at Alabama and had close relationships with, other coaches like Dabo Sweeney, if he's not sending his players to Georgia, I guess I sort of kind of get that, right? It's like, he's got a background, he's got friendships, he's got relationships. So if when a dyed-in-the-wool Bama guy is coaching a place like Grayson, I can sort of understand that. But there's a lot of the other stuff, including the, significant drought here at Buford, which isn't quite as easy to explain. And that's the part where I think the Georgia fans are like, what exactly really is going on here? And maybe it's nothing. Maybe these are all a collected set of simultaneous experiences that aren't otherwise connected. But sort of feels like we need a little bit more investigation to be able to say that for sure.
It's definitely weird, and maybe because of the fact that you do see some coaching turnover there at those top programs, and Gwinnett guys don't stay there forever. Maybe that makes it hard to establish a relationship. But I'll say this: this is not the last we're going to hear of this Gwinnett issue, because you brought up Mike Matthews a second ago. I'm going to bring up another name where 5-star prospect. He's set to announce his commitment later this month. Edric Houston. That's similarly not trending well. And look, like Georgia can stand to lose those, but going into this recruiting cycle, the 3 biggest positions of need, or the 4 big ones that I would say that Georgia needed to go out and recruit well, were quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and defensive line. They've obviously knocked it out of the park when it comes to the quarterback position there. And while they've done well at defensive line and wide receiver, when you have guys like Edric Houston in your backyard and you have guys like Mike Matthews in your backyard, you need to be able to find a way to land them. And while, yes, Georgia's going to sign a number 1 class, as Jeff will point out and tell us, a historic class from Georgia's perspective, this is a really strong in-state crop of talent this year, especially compared to where it was a season ago. And to miss out on some of those players, it is something to at least watch going forward there.
And I'll also say the flip side of some of this too is Georgia also, there's plenty of players in state that Georgia doesn't really pay much attention to. You look at a quarterback like Aaron Nolan, for instance, who's going to Ohio State, but, did not ever seem to be that big of a factor, for Georgia and its recruitment. So I think there may be some neutral observers here who say the door kind of swings both ways. As a Georgia fan, you can't complain about who from the state doesn't really go to Georgia when you have a lot of elite prospects who are certainly on the radar for many of the very best competitors along with Georgia for the national championship, who Georgia doesn't seem to be paying a lot of extra attention to there as well. So there may be a degree to which the somewhat neutral observer here would say, hey, so the door has kind of swung both ways in terms of Georgia's interest in in-state prospects. Oftentimes, maybe not paying them as much attention as they possibly could there as well. What do you say we do this? I believe, is Jeff back with us? I think I saw him there. Okay. Jeff, how about a final thought here on the man of the moment, Nate Frazier? I love it for Georgia, athletic running back. I love the trio of backs that Georgia's bringing in. I really feel like there's a chance for Georgia to have a value at the running back position. I think the offense has been great the last couple of years, but I do think there's a little bit of an opportunity for more explosive runs in this offense, especially for an offensive line that plays as well as Georgia's has the last couple of years. And athletes, the likes of Phillips and the likes of Frazier for sure, I think give you a chance to do that. So this isn't unexpected news from the standpoint that most Georgia fans, I think, it felt good about Frazier here for a little while. But in terms of the overall value of the victory, taking one more victory lap here for the Dogs probably makes some sense.
And we can't hear Jeff.
Yeah, you're muted, Jeff.
Still can't hear him. And we lost him.
All right. So, Connor, I'll give you the honors of the final thought here.
Well, hold on. Maybe, do we have Jeff now? Can you hear us, Jeff?
What's up, guys?
Hey, I can hear you. How about a final thought, Jeff?
Yeah, it's weird. The dashboard is saying not muted or whatever. All right, guys, I got a good point here. Despite all those technical flops, first of all, Nate Frazier gives Georgia it's really like a DeAndre Swift type talent. I feel comfortable throwing a player parallel out there. Lots of times those feel like manhole covers when you throw them around, but he's got some of that. He's a bigger DeAndre Swift, probably faster than DeAndre Swift. He's the athlete, not quite the athlete that Dwight Phillips is, but he's probably more the pure running back talent. He's played among the best high school football programs in the country in the California League. It's a running back for maybe not those old Mark Richt offenses and those early Bobo offenses, but it's now a running back for modern college football, the way that everybody slings it around. That being said, and first of all, this is anytime you can pull 3 running backs as highly rated. I know we mentioned him earlier in the broadcast, but this is really a big bouquet of flowers here for Del McGee, especially getting a guy that's number 1 running back in the country for Rivals and On 3. And then adding them to a Dwight Phillips kind of gadget, probably still going to be the most underrated player in this class. And then you've got Bowen's a 225-pound hammer that still has that 10.8, 10.9 speed, 10.7 speed. But my thought is this, because it's kind of the underlying thing. I know we've talked about Gwinnett County a lot, probably when I lost the feed when my computer was barking at me. Does it matter anymore, guys? This is a legitimate question
Yes,
for this
still
panel.
matters.
Does it matter 2 national championships the way Georgia did it without Buford players, without Gwinnett County players? Does it really matter? And please tell me why you feel that way.
Doesn't matter in terms of the overall wins and losses, but it does matter in terms of it just seems weird. And when Georgia fans engage on this topic, they don't do so from the perspective of, oh my gosh, I'm panicked, my team may not win games. It's the basic bedrock of college football is guys from your state grow up wanting to play for the home state team. And when you were forever in the most populous county, which is the closest to yours, I mean, the most populous of the metro counties, which happens to be the closest to you, when you've got that situation going on, it's more than just a little bit weird. So it matters in terms of the fact that the question going unanswered doesn't feel appropriate anymore. And it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not Georgia wins or loses games, but it does have something to do with the fact of when something seems weird, it's not right for that to go unremarked on.
To me, it matters because this is a Georgia program that emphasizes recruiting, I think, in my opinion, more than any other program in the country. And when you have this kind of trend out there where you've continued to see top players from that county, and yes, KJ Bolden hasn't spent every year of his life in Gwinnett County. Caleb Downs, Justice Haynes didn't either. But when you continue to invest the type of time, resources into recruiting those guys, and you don't land them, for whatever reason, when it continues to happen at this rate, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I'm not telling Kirby Smart how to recruit, but it's clear that there's something off with the way and their inability to recruit Gwinnett County. If you remove Dylan Raiola, who 3 months ago was in Arizona, off the top of my head here, KJ Bolden, Mike Matthews, Edric Houston, all 5-star prospects from the state of Georgia. All of them are ultimately going to probably end up playing their college football elsewhere in the state of Georgia. Now, it's not to say that those guys don't end up entering the transfer portal and trying to come back to Georgia later. We've seen Georgia do that with mixed results, taking those guys out of the transfer portal. But it matters because this is a Georgia program that invests more in recruiting than any other program in the country. And I believe that this is a legitimate recruiting storyline. It may not affect wins and losses all that much, but when we sit here and we talk about recruiting to the levels of which we do, I do think in that sense it matters.
And plus, Jeff, I'd add to that, the Georgia roster looks fine, but look at 2 that got away last year. I probably got Caleb Downs and Justice Haynes as 2 of about the probably 8 best players in the Alabama roster this year. I mean, those are Gwinnetians. In the case of Haynes, very short-term Gwinnetian, but those are 2 Gwinnetians that got away. And I mean, Downs is going to be there, Minka Fitzpatrick. And I think Alabama's going to have a very good offensive line, which I think opens the door for Justice Haynes to have a very good year. So Georgia's somewhat fine without, players like that lost a year ago. But some of, at least on paper, what appears to be their top competition for the SEC and the national championship are definitely benefiting from local products that chose to go elsewhere.
Brendan, is it a Buford thing or a Gwinnett County thing as a whole? Like for me, I'm going to take the counterpoint on both of this because, listen, Georgia could go to Buford right now and get a snapper, get a kicker, get a linebacker, get an offensive guard, and they could bust that curse. But I think the program, and believe me, I do get the sentiment about it's your backyard. It's almost sort of you want to own your territory. You want to go get fertile Gwinnett County soul. I don't need to tell you guys that Gwinnett County, by and large, is a lot of transplant places. I mean, for example, Edric Houston grew up in downtown Atlanta. His family were all Georgia fans, and now he's trending towards Ohio State. Believe what you want to believe on that recruitment. I just think it's because Georgia has went after higher value targets than Edric Houston, and he's going to be a phenomenal player wherever he goes. Great person, great young man. But to me, I'd rather Georgia's going to get guys everywhere. Like I think Paul Moon had a topic in the comment section where he's like, man, I think I'm paraphrasing Paul. Hopefully I don't get you wrong or right, but he said I'd rather Georgia have that pipeline at IMG Academy rather than in the Gwinnett County. I think there's good points on your side, but the talent is still always there. And I don't see deficits in terms of, well, Georgia didn't get this guy and they had to go get this guy, and that was clearly a better player. I mean, it's also a little bit of semantics. I know we've got Mountain View's Justin Green, but I know, Brandon, you're not even counting him inside Gwinnett County at all.
Not because he's not a good player, but just because Mountain View is kind of a long way away from sort of the epicenter of the population, typically speaking.
But he's technically inside Gwinnett County. I think if we drew the county surveyor out there, he's inside Gwinnett County. Am I right?
Technically speaking, still in the county, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun debate. I mean, that's what I wanted to get guys going on this and rolling on this, because I think the KJ Bolden makes it a bigger headline. And it's like, when is it ever going to stop? It used to be Georgia fan thought that they needed those players to go win the national championships and get to where everybody thought the glory years could come. And for me, these players are amazing. They're fantastic. It's a greater collection of players. They might go 0 for 12 in Gwinnett County this year with takes, but they're still beating the brakes off everybody else in the country for the top talent in the nation. And I guess that's what I focus on rather than the forest trees type issue here with local Gwinnett County versus the nation.
And maybe this is an issue, and I promise we're going to get ready to wrap up because we've been on here for a while. Maybe this is an issue where it's actually Gwinnett County that's got something to answer for more so than Georgia does, because Georgia's like, hey, the players we are getting are good. Maybe this is a Gwinnett County thing of, I don't mean to put some of these coaches on blast here, but maybe they've got the responsibility of stepping up to say, how come none of your guys ever go to Georgia? Maybe the questions to be answered here are by Gwinnett County high school coaches more so. And listen, I love a lot of them. But, by Gwinnett County high school coaches more so than the Georgia coaching staff, because Georgia can say, hey, whether these guys are, coming from the local product ranks or not, we're still doing our job because we're winning games.
I think to Jeff's point, what makes it, to me, all the more confounding is that they are able to go into literally every other school in the country, every other county in the country, and land players and land talented players. And for whatever reason, because there is, I believe now, a long enough runway to, and again, like if you want to compare it to say like a Broward County in South Florida, like sure, it's difficult to recruit in there. Out of Texas, it is difficult to recruit there. But I just think, and look, maybe it's just something simple as I'd just like to hear Kirby Smart's honest thoughts on this in terms of what he thinks about it. More so than, is it so much a big problem? Is it an issue? I mean, clearly, again, Georgia's got the number one class. As Jeff has said, they're going to sign the number one recruiting class in the country this year, and probably the number one recruiting class in the history of the Georgia football program. But it, to me, is at least interesting that you have this area that has produced so many top flight talent, so many top end prospects. And for whatever reason, they just don't end up picking Georgia. Now, like some of those guys obviously don't always turn out to be great pros and great players, but it is at least certainly something to follow there going forward.
Because here's the other thing, Jeff. I mean, it may not always be quite as easy as it is right now. I mean, it seems like right now Georgia has it very, very, very easy because of what a compelling recruiting pitch Georgia can offer. But listen, nothing lasts forever. 10, 15 years from now, Georgia's going to still need elite players, and maybe it doesn't have quite the same program prestige it appears to have now. That's going to be one of those times where you're going to want to be able to tap into your local market here. For my entire lifetime, Georgia's always ranked about number one on the list of top jobs in college football, and the geographic proximity to great players has always been one of the number one reasons why. The fact that Georgia currently either isn't tapping into that or possibly isn't able to tap into that, that it doesn't speak to a problem tomorrow, but it could speak to a problem a decade from now if Georgia doesn't figure out some way to fix all that.
I'm going through my mind right here, and I'm thinking of all the players that were true Georgia takes. Barrett Carter is another one that's probably the top-rated linebacker prospect in the country for the NFL out of Clemson. And, for me, I'm going to tell you what I really think here. Number one, I used to feel, Georgia wasn't winning enough, and that was in the early Kirby years, and that was, the late Mark Richt years where Georgia wasn't winning enough. And now we got to strike that one off. I still feel fundamentally it's about a young man wanting to get more than 50 minutes away from mom and dad and sprout his wings in college. I think that is still a major factor, more so than the coach's poison pill and saying, don't go there. I think there's really few demerits anybody can have to offer in terms of sometimes people just want to go away to college and get away to college. And then you've got a lot of folks in Gwinnett County simply that didn't grow up their whole lives with a Georgia Bulldog nightlight and a Georgia Bulldog comforter and a Georgia Bulldog lampshade in the house and a Georgia room. I would be more worried about this if Georgia's classes, I still do this every time because I do think it's significant on Before the Hedges every week. The one state, Georgia now has 27 commitments in this class. And the state with the most commitments in that class is still Georgia. Now, that number is 9, and it goes up and down in certain years. But sometimes, Brandon, I've done a deep dive lately on the Georgia 2021 class, and that is kind of, by Georgia's standards, really pathetic. When you look at that, the COVID year, more Georgia guys, there's really only like 5 or 6 contributors right now to the Georgia program amongst the 2021 guys they signed in that entire class. And that is a tremendous deviation from what Georgia usually gets out of its recruiting classes in terms of impact, in terms of first-year players making a contribution. And that was a class, asterisk next to it because of COVID. That was a class where Georgia had to stay in state because it was so tough to go out of state.
All right, my final thought is I think that Nate Frazier is an awesome ad for Georgia. I really, I think part of the reason we end up talking about some of the other stuff is because at a certain point in time, you said what can be said about Frazier. This is a very big ad for Georgia and a very successful 2024 group of recruits put together by Del McGee here. He really answers, I think, an emphatic need for this program in very loud fashion here with all of that. So that's my final thought. Connor, you got anything to say before we go?
No, yeah. Big win for Del McGee, big win for the Georgia running back position going forward. And again, as Jeff and I and you have all talked about over the course of this 2024 recruiting cycle, had to be something where they hit a lot on the offensive side of the ball. And I think landing Frazier absolutely accomplishes that.
Jeff, very quickly, anything else to say before we go here?
Brandon, what's your nickname for him? Is he Nate the Great?
I like that. I like that for sure. When it comes to the end zone here, he could be spending plenty of time there. I was going to do like a down goes Frazier type joke, but I'll just let that go. I was going to say something along the lines of down goes Frazier into pay dirt or something like that, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of that to come in the days ahead.
How about touchdown goes Frazier? There you go.
Yeah, there you go. That's not bad. I'm sure there'll be plenty of that on tap for the very near future there as well. Something else that can be on tap for you this weekend. You got some stuff going on the grill, or you got some back to school needs, things like that. Your friends at your local Kroger can take care of you on all of that. Obviously, Kroger, a big part of what we've been doing here with these commitment decision announcements for many, many years, and happy to have them with us here this afternoon there as well. And happy to have all of you as a part of that there too. Speaking of high school football, tomorrow we'll be live with the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic kickoff luncheon ahead of action, which gets going the following week. But a preview of all that there tomorrow locally. That's going to be a lot of fun. Connor will be in Athens taking care of everything that goes on with Georgia football here this week as their fall camp rolls on. Jeff will have plenty more on Frazier and kind of what's next for Georgia. Obviously looking ahead to a Williams-Nwaneri commitment decision here about midway point this month. So we'll keep our eye on all of that. Busy times around DawgNation. We appreciate you being a part of it. So for Jeff Sentell and Connor Riley, I will say thank you very much for being a part of this Kroger commitment specialist. 4-star running back Nate Frazier has picked the Dogs. They go out to California, land themselves a good one of 3 top 10 running backs now for Georgia in this 2024 class. That is good news, and we'll see you next time right here around DawgNation.